I often cover societal juxtapositions here, and normally they involve the contrast of what humans say and do, their jobs and their personal lives, or what they think about themselves and each other. But today, I want to explore the juxtaposition between humans and an apex predator, sharks. We love Shark Week, shark movies, sharks in aquariums, cocaine sharks. Sharks is entertainment. But sharks themselves, we have fear or indifference. My next guest is someone who started out her relationship with sharks as one of fear, but now it could be argued that she spends more time with them than humans. She's a journalist, TV presenter, and shark conservationist who spent over 2 decades combining conservation and media conversation. You may recognize her from Discovery's Shark Week show, Tiger Queen, as being the first female host in 33 years of the series' history, or from Sharks in Paradise, also Shark Week, which she created, hosted, and served as executive producer on. But today she's going to help us close the gap between rumor and truth as we ask the question, do we need sharks? Explorer, waterwoman, shark ally, Kinga Philipps. I am so happy we are doing this.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. And what a great introduction. Wow. Can I put that on a t-shirt and wear it around? That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make it printed ASAP. You've been so many cool places around the world, like swimming with sharks, studying them, talking about them, tagging them. But I think my listeners would be interested to know that you have more recently come here to the Florida Panhandle. Since I have a lot of listeners who are right here in the Pensacola area, tell us what has attracted you here recently with the sharks. What's going on?
Well, you are totally right that my last shark adventure was actually right there in the Panhandle area on the Emerald Coast. And you guys have something really, really cool happening there right now. And what that is that about every June-ish to about every September-ish, you guys have an aggregation of tiger sharks that has started to show up in the last 4 years or so. And when I say aggregation, I mean a bunch of sharks. And by that, we mean like 37 sharks swimming around the pier, mostly the Okaloosa Island pier. But now we are seeing them spread out to the Pensacola pier, to some of the other piers in the area. And we were all, as shark conservationists and local scientists, we were like mind boggled because normally you have to get in a plane, get in a car, get in a rickshaw, you go all over the world to some of the most remote corners of the world to get in the water with sharks like this in this mass amount. And here they are basically literally in your backyard. So it is such a cool opportunity to get to study them, to figure out why they're coming, why now. I mean, all the questions are being asked, and that's what we're working on figuring out.
That's really exciting. Are you any closer to finding the answers?
Well, we have a lot of theories, and I think we're probably onto a couple of things. One of the big factors for shark migrations is predator-prey relationships. They're hungry, they're snacky, like the rest of us, right? There's an all-you-can-eat buffet somewhere, we're going to go. And that's kind of what it seems like they're doing here. It looks like they're following the mass bait balls and bait fish that show up every year. There's also the argument for climate change and that we have different water temperatures, and that's affecting both the prey and the predators. And the other thing that sharks migrate for is boom, chicka, wow, wow. They like to show up where all the males and females gather together, and we are seeing everything from juveniles to adults here. But we're really thinking that the main factor is the massive all-you-can-eat buffet of bait fish.
There's always this tug of war when you have a bunch of sharks showing up. Fascination, fear, fascination, fear. And even in areas where people don't have 24 shark showing up during tourist season, no less, there's still that tug of war. I think we all know the stat about you're more likely to die in a car accident than to be bitten and killed by a shark. So why then collectively do we still view them as so dangerous as to be expendable?
That's a great question. And I think that's a multifaceted answer. And you're right. You are much more likely to die in a car accident. The statistics are actually really comical when you look at what will kill you before a shark will, including toilets. So run, everyone, run away from your toilet because that's much more dangerous than sharks. I think A lot of it is sharks bring out a very primal fear in people. You have these massive predators in the ocean, which in large part is already very scary to people because that is not a habitat that we are super comfortable in. We can't breathe there. It's scary. There's big waves, there's jellyfish, there's all kinds of stuff that can get you in the ocean. It's very intimidating for a lot of people. So you have these animals and they're underneath the surface. They're silent. You can't see them coming. I mean, it is at the end of the day, it's why Jaws was so popular. And it is the stuff of horror movies. There are so many more people who die by dogs every year than they do by sharks, but dogs are freaking cute and adorable. And we can just let that go that they maul a significant number of us yearly. And with sharks, they have these sharp teeth. They're not really fuzzy. And there they are in our, what we consider our playground, which is also their home. And especially in an environment like this, we're talking about the Emerald Coast, which is one of the most popular beach areas in the entire country. And you can literally throw a rock right now during the summer and hit a tiger shark. Like we were laughing and we were going in to do some of the science. We were out there with Alex Fogg, who's the local scientist, and with Shane Reynolds, who's the filmmaker and who really called me in for the project. And we're in our scuba gear walking past like children playing in the surf, and we're going to dive with tiger sharks. And our max depth was like 15 to 18 feet. So this is right here where we all interact and play. So I think that in and of itself is very scary for people. And then the other factor is we are constantly bombarded from every angle by the media. So what the media chooses to really highlight is what's going to be at the top of our brain is, wow, this is really scary. I mean, you watch serial killer documentaries enough, and that's going to become your biggest fear that there's a serial killer that's going to come get you. Chances are real slim, but it happens. And same with sharks. This morning, I actually, because I knew we were going to do this interview, I got on and I Googled dog maulings. Very sadly and tragically, in the last 3 days, there have been 2 children that have been killed by dogs in the United States. You don't really hear about that because that doesn't make national news as much as a shark attack. A shark attack makes international news. So when there is a shark bite, when there is a shark attack, that is everywhere, all over the media, and we're bombarded with it. And everyone's like, shark attacks are increasing. They're everywhere. They're getting us. The reality is they have minutely increased. And that is less about sharks are now more likely to get us and more about statistics. There's more people going into the water. Shark numbers are increasing because conservation measures are working. But again, the media is making it seem like it's a real problem. And the reality is it's not a real problem. There's things we can talk about within that, about people not treating nature like Disneyland, but it's not as big of an issue as I think people make it out to be.
Oh, it's so funny that you bring up Disneyland because I saw the post that you did on your stories, was it yesterday or today, about the Disneyfication of nature. I went and I looked at that guy's Instagram and saw how he talks about it's a feeling of our guaranteed safety. And really what it is,
Yes.
I would add, is a disconnect from the reality of the natural animal kingdom. My husband and I have a joke that like, oh, those people are inside cats. Like the people that go to Yellowstone and ask the rangers,
Yes.
when are you letting the animals out? Those folks are inside cats and maybe they should stay inside. I don't know. That's a little cynical, but I digress. I think at best, a lot of people have an appreciation for sharks. Like they appreciate them on a nature documentary. They appreciate the mechanism by which they hunt and how they have evolved. But somehow, still, if they've moved from terror to appreciation, it still doesn't always translate to like, oh, we need to preserve them. So help us understand how sharks matter to the ecosystem.
Well, that's a really good point that you make there also, because the ocean is also, once again, not our environment. So it's kind of like, ooh, maybe I think sharks are cool. I love watching Shark Week. Oh, I think they're scary, but I find them really fascinating. But they're someone else's problem because they're in the ocean and I don't live in the ocean.
Exactly.
The ocean is incredibly important to us, incredibly important. And where you start to run into the problem with, oh, maybe we don't need sharks. Maybe if we get rid of some of them, they'll be better. They'll stop eating us, is you are skewing the natural balance of what nature is. Nature revolves around balance. And that is such an incredibly important thing. So when you have issues and you oftentimes hear fishermen talking about, oh, there's too many sharks, we should get rid of them. Well, first of all, there's not too many sharks. Shark numbers are starting to come back because of conservation matters that are really working. But In like the 1970s is when commercial fishing really exploded and we started annihilating shark numbers, fish numbers in general. Commercial fishing is a huge problem and it's honestly not getting any better. These commercial fleets, mostly owned by China, are getting bigger and more effective and efficient in what they do, which is harvesting the ocean. And so these sharks are getting plucked off as bycatch constantly, not to mention shark fin soup, squalene, shark cartilage, all the parts that they use usually because they end up in bycatch. But as shark numbers are starting to come back in certain areas where they're protected, you have fishermen going out there and going, oh gosh, these sharks, they're taking my catch. Well, the problem with that is one, the balance is already skewed because fish numbers are a lot less than they were. So you have fishermen, an increasing number of them, because we also have more efficient fishing measures. We have more people buying boats. We have more people enjoying recreationally and commercially the ocean. And then you have sharks and humans competing for kind of the limited amount of fish that's already there. The oceans really aren't that healthy in most places. So you have sharks and you have humans going for the same fish. So who's the apex predator there? You have to look at underwater. Well, it's going to be the shark, and there's an easy catch of a fish on a line. They're going to take it. But how many people are getting fishing licenses? How many people are getting out there and fishing? Like, we are really the apex predators out there. So that argument of, well, there's too many sharks. We're seeing a lot more sharks. Well, sure we are. Who doesn't have a drone? I have a drone. I'm the most technologically incompetent person in the world, and I have a drone. I have a GoPro. We have 360 cameras. Like, everyone has the ability to see things that they weren't able to see before. So now we're like, oh, wow, they're everywhere. Are they though? Or are we just seeing them now? So there's all these interesting caveats that people really don't look at when they look at, oh, there's more sharks. But you want to reduce those numbers where you're going to run into problems. And that's where you're going to start running into the balance. Like, sharks as apex predators create balance in the ocean. So that means if you eliminate sharks, first of all, there's going to be something else that's going to fill its place, and it might not be the thing that you want. We have in areas of the world, there's jellyfish blooms. And a big part of the theory of why that's happening and it's clogging up nets and it's creating problems is because the predators that are there to basically predate on young jellyfish larvae are being taken out of the water. So then you have a balance that is skewed out of proportion. It's like you look at the lionfish problem that happens in Florida. The reason that's a problem is because those fish don't actually have predators in Florida because they don't belong here. So when something doesn't have a predator or you eliminate a top predator, you're going to have an explosion of another species that shouldn't be there that's going to throw everything out of balance. So then the fish maybe that you want to harvest, the fish that you enjoy eating, isn't going to be as abundant because something else is taking that fish because the sharks took the predator of that. So it's really this like weird cycle that kind of puts you into a head spin, but we really should just trust nature that it's been really good at this for a really long time. And we're kind of the new kids on the block. And when we come in and screw it up thinking we're making it better, we're actually not.
Isn't it so funny, though, how because we have a lot of people that don't have a robust environmental ethic, I think it's hard for them to see the interconnectedness of one species to the ocean. We all agree water in general important to human life, but sometimes the delivery system of how we get our water, the delivery system of how we get our food, there's like a disconnect in that chain for people, which I don't know how to overcome that. I mean, have you ever come across a conversation with someone where you were able to help them make that connection, or they themselves disclose to you, oh, I used to be disconnected and now I understand?
I think that goes back to what you said about most people being indoor cats. When you really think about it, the average person will recognize where water comes from and where food comes from. But we all hear the stories of like someone asking their child, where do chickens live? Where do chickens come from? And they're like, the grocery store. Because there is that disconnect of where does everything get from where it originates to our plate or to our cup. And if you sit and really think about it, I think the average intelligent person is going to say, oh, okay, I get the connection. But on the daily, we don't think about that because we are kind of living in this urbanized society where everything is really easy for us. We turn on the tap and there's the water. We open the refrigerator and there's all of our food that came to us through Instacart, or we went to the grocery store and there it is nicely packaged for us. Like, we are becoming further and further removed from the origin of where food comes from, where resources come from. And when you have that disconnect, people start to care less and less, and they start to see it as somebody else's problem. So if there's not enough water or there's not enough fish in the ocean, well, someone should fix that. And it's interesting because I've actually been in those conversations with people, or I've seen it on social media platforms where you say something about overfishing or shark fin soup or 100 million sharks getting taken a year, and someone will comment, well, isn't that your job as a conservationist? Yeah, but the ocean's really big. So I can't snorkel around the whole ocean and give out tickets to people who are doing it wrong. It really needs to be an educational effort, and it also needs to be a personal desire of awareness. And that's where I think that's kind of the hardship is we can't go in like a little robot into someone and reconstruct their personal desire for awareness over certain things. They ultimately have to want to, don't they? So all we can do is kind of spread the word and spread the message and give people resources that when they have a desire to learn, they can go to like the Shark Allies website and they can learn how they can help or they can get information. We are in the information age. So if you want information, it is right there at your fingertips.
You mentioned commercial fishing earlier. Would you consider that the primary threat to sharks?
Yes, I think commercial fishing, habitat destruction is really the primary threat to most species in the ocean.
I feel like a lot of things, the people who care the least are the policy gatekeepers to people who care the most. How do you get through to people when the whole they're important to the ecosystem speech isn't working?
You have to make them important to people on an individual level because the gatekeepers, the policymakers, we can't completely condemn them because they have a really tough job. They have the hardest job. They're trying to please everyone. And as we know, as every good Instagram quote would tell us, you can't please everybody. But as a politician, as a policymaker, it's literally your job to try to please absolutely everybody. You can't. And then we know that there are lobbyists. There are big groups out there. There are fishing lobbies. There are all kinds of people who have a vested interest in different sides of an issue. And oftentimes, the money is not on the side of conservation and environmentalism because there's less money to be had on that side than there is on fishing lobbies and commercial fishing in that side. So when you need to address people and when you need to address politicians, it has to become verbiage that makes it valuable to people on an individual level to explain to them why this is going to end up affecting your dinner plate, why this is going to end up affecting the air you breathe or the water you drink. Because if it's just like kind of a vague, nebulous idea of it would be bad, people are like, eh.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of what I appreciate about the way that you present your environmental messaging is it's very inviting. It's very, come, children, come see what I have seen. Whereas in my experience, many environmental groups, many people who are nature advocates, they lead with shame on those who are not advocating for nature. And I often wonder, like, do you realize you're doing the opposite of what you're probably wanting to accomplish, which is to get more people on board? You do have to attract them, you know?
That's an excellent point. And it took conservationists a really long time to learn that because for a long time, conservation was about don't do this
Yeah.
or let us show you a documentary about why the world is ending and there's nothing we can do about it and we're all going to die. And then you realize people don't want more of that. People don't want to be shamed anymore. People don't want to hear about how everything's ending, everything's wrong, everything sucks. We all have like world is ending fatigue. So, really, the best way to interact with people and to get people on board is to be like the little mermaid, like, come see my world, right? And show them what's beautiful. Like, we have a common saying in conservation that people protect what they love. And that there's nothing that is more true than that in the shark diving space. The idea of getting people in the water with sharks and showing them the reality of what they are versus what the media tells us they are. I have seen people have come to God moments, have come out grown men crying out of a shark dive because they cannot believe that they witnessed this animal and had them look at them in the eye and not try to eat them. They are enamored by this. And those people go off into the world and their narrative about sharks to everyone they meet is completely different from that point on. When you can show people beauty and magic and nature, this is why David Attenborough is a national icon, international icon, I would say. This is why people love shows like BBC Blue Planet, because it is beautiful and magical. And when you fall in love with something, and especially if you ever have the opportunity to do it on a personal level, then it becomes really poignant to you. In fact, like shark diving now is become so massive that by the end of this year, PADI, the Professional Association of Diving Instructors that most of us are certified to scuba dive with, is coming out with a shark diving course. And they're also going to be teaming up with conservation efforts to do basically a shark and a ray census. So that is so cool. And the fact PADI is not a 501c3. People are like, oh, another course by PADI. Well, they're a business. So the fact that a business is recognizing that shark diving is so important and that people are really out there wanting to see them and offering a course to do that is pretty extraordinary. We as Shark Allies did a shark valuations project where we basically went out and calculated how much a live shark is worth to the dive industry and to people wanting to see it, even know that it's there. Again, that goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, where people might have a fear of sharks, but they also have this immense fascination by them and want to be close to them.
Oh my gosh, that is so interesting. It does seem like money moves the needle and market signals move the policy. It's like a little butterfly effect. If you can create public interest that creates a need for an industry, like apparently PADI shark diving certification, that creates even more market signals that could tell certainly all the way up to policymakers, hey, this is important. But below policymakers, just before we get to them, we have municipalities, we have local governments. And I think that's beautifully illustrated by, was it Cabo? Tell me about the fishing village that used to fin sharks, and then it became instead a shark diving resort, basically.
So Cabo Pulmo, right there on the tip of the Baja Peninsula, was a fishing village. And part of what they did was they would catch sharks, they would take the meat, they would take the fins, and you can kill an animal once and confiscate its parts. You can sell them. And then some very intelligent people there realized, what if we actually made this a sanctuary and we protected our resources here? And those are people that were thinking long term, right? Because I completely understand, and something else that we are very aware of in conservation is that you can't go into a place where there are limited resources and be like, you're bad, you shouldn't be doing these things. People need to feed their families. People need income. People need a roof over their head. People need food. But what you can do, and it's even better when people do it themselves, is create an alternative source of income that has a much longer ranging effect on them and their families and their generations to come. So here in Cabo Pulmo, a couple of families got together and they basically created this marine sanctuary. It rebounded by 400% in a matter of years. And it is one of the oldest reefs in the Northern Hemisphere. It is now constantly, you see it being posted by National Geographic. Sylvia Earle's been there, amazing marine biologist. All of us divers have been there. It's famous for these incredible swirling schools of jacks, mobula rays, bull sharks. It's a great place where my scientist friends in Mexico go and study bull sharks. Nature has rebounded. It's kind of like in Jurassic Park. Nature will always find a way, and it does. And when you leave it alone and you protect it, it finds its way back so quickly. So now in this tiny little town where there, I think, last time I was there were maybe 3 or 4 little restaurants. And by that, I mean like a little palapa with tacos, a dirt road, and I think there's 5 dive shops. And people from all over the world come there to dive. And because they want to see the biomass, they want to see the big fauna, they want to see the sharks, they want to see the jacks, they want to see the mobulas. And the Sea of Cortez is one of the places Jacques Cousteau was like, this place is magic. And it is. And now Cabo Pulmo is basically this poster child for what can happen when you think into the future and you conserve something instead of destroying it.
You bring up the topic of tourism. I do want to talk more about that because it's an interesting, potentially gray area. It was the Omaha Zoo aquarium for me, and it was cage diving for you that inspired us as kids to be excited about the ocean and sharks and not afraid of them. So it has benefit. But are things like cage diving and sharks in aquariums counterproductive at the end of the day?
I personally don't think so, but I'm not a purist. And there are a lot of people who would fight me to the death on that, who are purists. This is why my perspective is my perspective. I think most importantly, it is very important to be responsible as a tourist. And most importantly, to pick responsible outfitters. I personally think that part of the magic of being on this planet is getting to share it with all these incredible animals. Getting to interact with them is so incredibly special. I also think that part of conservation is getting people to own these animals as part of their world and seeing them in a way that they want to protect them because they've had this amazing experience with them. So if you put tourism on a scale when it comes to wildlife, to me, the benefits outweigh the negatives of it. Are there negatives? Yes. People can argue, and there have been scientific papers on does it change the habits of sharks? Some sharks get more parasites because they hang out in an area far too long because they know that they're attracted by feeding this and that. Then you run into kind of the nuances of that. Should we be feeding sharks? Should we be hand feeding sharks? I'm personally against hand feeding sharks because sharks are very smart. They really are. Like some people are like, oh, we shouldn't even be putting a slick in the water. I'm like, well, that ship literally sailed 2,000 years ago because sharks have been following ships since we built the first one and started throwing trash and feces and dead bodies and everything else off the side. And sharks were like, ha ha, delicious. I'm going to follow you. But so sharks and boats is not an interaction that I'm like, oh, this is terrible. But sharks, because they are very smart, when they see hands, and especially the whites of hands, every time I'm in the water with sharks, I wear gloves and I'm fully suited up because the whites of our hands look like the inside of a fish. So you don't want a shark to be attracted to that. If on top of that, sharks are trained, which they're totally trainable, to be hand fed by divers, you then have sharks that will approach people going, oh, are you going to feed me? And I personally think that a lot of the unfortunate shark incidents that have happened in areas like the Bahamas or the Red Sea really can be summed up because sharks approached a snorkeler going, oh, wow, are you going to feed me fish? And then, of course, a person panics and you have a terrible outcome there. But that's not 100% of the situations at all. But I do think that influences it. In fact, in the Red Sea, there were a couple of shark attacks and someone's hand was hit and then their butt was bitten. And then they realized that the dive masters were feeding squid to these sharks and they would keep them on a pouch on their butt and then they would hand feed them. And so the sharks were so smart that they would go for the two areas that they knew that there was food. So I think there's a direct correlation between that sort of thing. So all of that to say is sourcing your outfitter and making sure that the people that you go out with have very responsible practices in how they interact with wildlife. Obviously not disturbing wildlife, obviously not riding shark fins. Obviously, if you're there to get an Instagram shot and you just want to get a selfie of yourself hanging on a shark, who are you really helping? Your like count, or are you helping the shark? So many things to consider within that. Then there's the other side of that. We're talking about in the wild. Then you have the other side of that, which is zoos and aquariums. And that is a can of worms to open and talk about that. Do I think that there are some animals that are okay in aquariums? Yes. Do I think whales and dolphins and like highly intelligent species like that should be in aquariums? No. Have I gone to aquariums and been like, oh my God, this is magic? Yes, absolutely. So have we learned so much about certain animals, whether terrestrial or from the ocean, from aquariums and zoos? Yes, we have. So there are so many layers to all of this that we could probably talk for 4 hours about it. But I do think that responsible ocean tourism and getting in the water with sharks has more benefits than it does negatives.
So much nuance there with all these topics. And that's why these more long form conversations are so helpful because it allows people to kind of chew on the information themselves and consider it for the situation that they are about to experience, for
Yes.
their local dive opportunity or for their local aquarium. I do want to ask you about shore fishing. Is it all fine and good as long as they're tagging the sharks? What do you know about that?
Shore fishing for sharks is tough. And I'll give you a very personal experience that just happened here in a second. But I'll say this first. It is legal in a lot of states. Laws are different in each state on which sharks you can land, which sharks you can bring in. Some are endangered. Some you have to cut the line immediately. Some it's catch and release. The problem with that is that some species are pretty hardy, some species aren't. Like hammerheads, for instance, are really, really delicate. So a large percentage of hammerheads that you land, that you bring on the shore, then people want to take photos with them and you release them, They're not going to make it. So that's problematic in and of itself. The second part, and this is something that just happened down the street from me here, is my friend Mina called me and she's, hey, listen, I just heard that someone brought in a really big shark down here at Temescal Beach at like Tower 12. I'm going to go look at it. Turned out the lifeguards, the police, and Fish and Game all said, oh, that's a mako shark. You can bring it in because it is legal to bring in a mako shark. Turns out it wasn't a mako shark. It was a great white. And it was a juvenile great white. They all misidentified it, and this person was allowed to land and kill an endangered species of shark that is protected, that you are not allowed to bring in, and that the moment that you bring it in, that you have it on the line, you're supposed to cut the line. He was also fishing with a drone. So now we have technology aiding people in identifying these animals in the water, baiting them and bringing them in. You know, I don't want to get involved in this because this is like an ongoing legal thing, but we're pretty sure he knew that it was a great white. And also, Fish and Game, you guys could maybe like figure that out a little bit better, it'd be great. We have Dr. Chris Lowe here, who is the head of the Cal State Long Beach Shark Lab. And they have Fish and Game have direct access to him. They can send him a photo. He can identify the species. We actually all went into overdrive. We sent him a photo and he was like, yes, that looks like a juvenile white shark. Now, Fish and Game supposedly took DNA samples and they are hopefully going to rectify that situation with a fine, how you can handle that on the back end. But unfortunately, a protected species lost its life. We're all like this.
I know. Well, there's something about shore fishing for sharks that makes me feel uneasy. And I've tried to overcome it. Some of the fishermen have said, oh, yeah, we eat the shark. And I'm like, well, it's a fish. You know, I mean, it's not. It's a cetacean. It's different. But
well, no, it's a fish. Sharks are fish, but they're also loaded with mercury. So if you are out there eating sharks, it's really not a great thing. So there's the personal hit for people, right? If you want to, you know, go and fish sharks and it's legal, good for you. But eating them, not a good idea. They have more mercury than most of the fish out there.
Yikes. Well, I may or may not have taken the FWC online course for a shark permit in preparation for our talk today because
you're the best. I love you.
I wanted to know, like, people, like FWC people, I'm saying FWC, for those that are not in Florida, that's Florida Wildlife Commission. They're the folks that are the Florida version of the folks that accidentally misidentified your white shark. They're smart. Like, I've met a lot of them, and they really do care about nature. So
they're good humans.
They're basically like Eagle Scouts, and they get paid to be Eagle Scouts. It's kind of a cool job. I don't understand if they know that some sharks do not recover from being dragged in to shore. Why is shore fishing allowed? And why in the required test, which now I have taken to get a shark fishing license, it makes no mention of that. And hammerheads are a permitted species to pull up on shore. Like, why? Why is there that disconnect between what biologists know to be true and the rules for the general public?
There's always has been and probably always will be a big disconnect between the realities of conservation and the legalities of things. And that's really unfortunate. And I don't know how we can fully rectify that because there are so many lobbies that are very strong in terms of being able to fish, being able to recreationally fish. There's also something with sharks that's really interesting because it brings up a lot of ego. There's a lot of machismo around sharks. And even the shark conservation community, there's a lot of like conflict and a lot of like turf wars and stuff like that because it's like there's some badassery when it comes to sharks. But then when it comes to shark fishing, I think that exists as well. And you have a lot of people that are like, wee, look at me, I brought in this apex predator. Like, I've triumphed over it. And then you have them like taking the photos with the jaws, like the really traditional photos. And you can't fully blame people for that because sharks are badass. They're totally amazing. And then groups gather on the beach and everyone wants to see it. And it's legal. So why wouldn't you do it, right? And if you're a fisherman, it's fun. What's going to fight harder than a shark? So I try to always think outside of the box and I try to think like every part of the equation and everyone who's involved. So you're not just like pointing a finger and going, oh, you're bad or you're stupid or you shouldn't be doing that, because there are reasons that people do what they do. And usually they're fairly legitimate. But to your point of why certain things are allowed when we know that's not really going to end well, I don't know. I wish it wasn't, especially with hammerheads. They're super delicate. I even went to the aquarium in Atlanta, that big aquarium, and they had hammerheads in there. And hammerheads are super sensitive. And those big hammers that they have are loaded with sensory devices. And these hammerheads swimming around in this aquarium, there were other sharks, there were tiger sharks in there, and they're all just kind of swimming around. They're like, oh, I'm in an aquarium. The hammerheads were so erratic, because when you think about it, that aquarium is also filled with equipment, everything that's purifying the water, cleaning the water, and all of that is affecting their senses. So there are certain species that are just not going to do as well in certain environments. And for some reason, hammerheads are much more delicate, and they really, really don't do well when they're brought up on shore or they're fished.
The other kind of gray area that I wanted to bring up in addition to tourism is media, because you have done really cool programs on traditional media, on TV. I loved Tiger Queen. I love Sharks in Paradise. Anyone who hasn't watched that, y'all need to go watch it. It's the coolest. And social media. But aside from some of these educational social media accounts and educational television programs, there's a lot of negative, like, demonization of sharks. I mean, even I was browsing on one of the, streaming services that we have, and maybe I entered the word shark or something, or maybe I was trying to find a documentary, and I was shocked at how many, like, cheesy terror movies there were that were about sharks. And I was like, wow, people like actually watching this. And then on social media, you have Ocean Ramsey riding the backs of sharks basically and filming it to this like ethereal music. I don't know. I appreciate the coverage, but should we just be glad that sharks are even being depicted, or are things like this actually huge steps backwards in terms of the efforts towards conservation?
Both. And that is something that you tread so lightly on in the conservation world, because it is all a double-edged sword. I've worked for Shark Week. I love Shark Week. I absolutely recognize what Shark Week has brought to the table in terms of getting people interested in sharks. And Shark Week is also a duality in and of itself, right? Shark Week can have anywhere from 18 to 42 shows per season. It's almost all done by different production companies. And I feel like they do a good job of having some really scientific shows, some really great narrative storylines that lean more into cool science and discoveries. I was very fortunate to have worked on shows like that. And then they have some shows that are stunts and celebrities and people jumping into the water. I mean, they literally have jumped the shark, right? So you see both sides of that. And do I think Shark Week is good? I do, because it keeps people talking about sharks. Do I think social media about sharks is good? I do. But I think, you mentioned Ocean Ramsey and influencers like her. I think she's a beautiful underwater model and she loves diving. But I think when you have that big of a platform, you also have a sense of responsibility, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And there is a very delicate line in how ocean wildlife and sharks really should be portrayed to the public. They are not mindless killers that want to eat us all. And when you see like a pretty girl hanging on a fin, do you go, oh, wow, that shark's not eating her? But then at the same time, she has millions of followers. Do those followers want to go out and do that? And do they then realize, oh, I don't need to give this animal any personal space, and that shark's really cute? And then you have people treating sharks in a way that isn't very respectful for them. You have them getting chased away from feeding opportunities. You have people like wanting that shot. You have people fishing them and bringing them up on shore and like taking photos with them. There's a duality to everything. Like, I love shark diving. I have been this close to a tiger shark. And to me, that proves that if that shark wasn't such a super patient predator, like, I could never be face to face with a wild lion or a wild bear. It would eat me. But sharks, I have been that close to. I particularly, and this is personal for me, I don't like touching wildlife because that doesn't benefit them. It only benefits me. To me, that's an ego hit. To me, that's, I dominated you. Oh, look, someone's going to like my photo of me hanging on you. I'm not looking for that. Like if I want to teach someone something about sharks, or I want to show them that I can be in the presence of them, I can do that without contact. And that I think is such a really, really important thing to remember. And again, it's a fine line. I don't want to villainize anyone. I don't want to condemn anyone. I do feel like people have multiple layers of what they're out to gain with this kind of stuff. Some of it is conservation oriented, some of it is I'm selling leggings. So, can you blame people for wanting to commercialize their popularity and their success? You can't. But do you hope that they do that with the intention of being more conservation oriented and really ultimately teaching people the right ways to interact with animals and why these animals are special? You hope that they do.
So, where do we as like average people, like what does the girl in Nebraska do to help the cause of sharks? Because most of the population globally does not live on the water's edge. What is actually helpful when it comes to action for the preservation of sharks, which, as in summary, boys and girls, is the preservation of the ocean, the preservation of our food, the preservation of us as Homo sapiens. So, just in case you weren't taking notes, what can we do?
That's terrific as well, because I think every conservation conversation like this has to have some kind of an action button. Otherwise, you're just kind of spinning your
Yeah.
wheels. And the most important thing I think is educate yourself. How people can go out into the world and have a conversation that's intelligent about sharks. I read so many comments on social media where I'm like, why do you even think that? Just the simple fact that people think that there's an overabundance of shark attacks. If people actually really went and Googled numbers and look, they'd be like, oh, this actually isn't a problem. This is just what we're being told is a problem. So that educate yourself. If you ever have the opportunity to go shark diving, do. You will see a completely different side of these animals. But I also recognize that not everyone is ever going to have that opportunity, but we all do have a chance to educate ourselves a little bit better in how we have conversations with people, in how we present our ideas to people. If you go out into the world and someone goes, oh God, I'm scared of sharks, and you go, oh, well, why are you? This is kind of what I've learned about sharks. You were giving them a nugget of information that maybe they didn't have before. So you are bringing something to them. And maybe at that point, you are then giving them reason to go and do some research on their own. So I think just simple narrative conversations, going out into the world and maybe shining a more positive light rather than the whole idea of, oh, I'm terrified of them. That in and of itself is actually really good. As far as shark conservation goes, I work with Shark Allies, which I think is such an amazing organization. Our website is so great, and that there are so many buttons on there where people can go and they can learn all of this information I'm talking about. But also, there's action buttons. What can you do? And some of the things are really simple. Don't support organizations like outfitters that don't have good practices. If you hear about that, avoid them. Great. That in and of itself is really important. Two, there are certain products that you can avoid. Things like squalene, which comes from shark livers. It can also come from plants. So if it's plant-based, great. If it's shark liver based, maybe don't buy that product. There are supplements that are sold with shark cartilage. Avoiding those is really great. Obviously, shark fin soup is kind of a no-brainer, but that's something that should be avoided. And I think that conservationists in China, for instance, where it is considered traditional, and it is kind of starting to fade away, which is great, but they have utilized celebrities and people who are inspirational to basically say, no, this isn't cool anymore. So I think when people who have a platform speak out against something like that's really valuable and important. Obviously, ocean conservation measures, being aware of where your seafood comes from, supporting good seafood practices rather than the really damaging ones. That's really, really important. Knowing what seafood you're eating. So much seafood is mislabeled. People think that they're eating whitefish or they're eating something like flake, and it's actually shark. So making sure that you are buying your seafood from responsible organizations, that what you're getting is actually what you're getting. And that's important to you, because if you're being fed shark, remember, there's a lot of mercury in those fish. Apex predators are going to have the most mercury. So that's taking care of yourself as well. So there are little things that we can all do, from the way we talk about sharks to the products that we buy to the outfitters and commercial fishing organizations that we support, that are going to make a difference. You vote with your dollars, you vote with your voice.
Absolutely. I love that you covered everything from your attitude and the way you speak to how and where you spend your money. That is such an empowering spectrum. and I feel like one that anyone can get on board with. So thank you so much. I hope that everyone does check out Shark Allies. They were very helpful in researching for this episode. I learned so much just from listening to Stephanie, the founder, on the interviews that she's done.
Awesome.
Yeah, she does great work, and their website and Instagram are fantastic too. And I would encourage anyone to follow your Instagram as well. Are there any projects or anything else that you want to plug before we log off?
I mean, the big one that I'm working on right now is what's going on in Pensacola. So I think you guys should stay tuned to that because there's going to be some cool stuff coming out of that about the tiger sharks.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. And hopefully, we will have a really amazing follow up on the mystery of our local tiger sharks.
Thank you.